Welcome, welcome, welcome to Leadershipisation, all things leadership. Look, today, maybe you're here and maybe you're someone who needs to listen to this conversation because what's happening is that your ideas and your recommendations simply aren't landing. I want to tell you, I want to assure you of this. It may not necessarily be the work that you're doing or the idea that you have. It's more likely to be how you're influencing the room. Now, it's easy for capable people to get this wrong. It's really easy for us to think, well, I've had a great idea here. I've made a really strong recommendation. And what's going to happen is that a decision will follow that. People will back my idea. So when we think that, what we do is we explain it clearly, we work through it, we walk through it, we provide all of the detail, and still there's no decision and there's no change in people's thinking. Maybe what happens is that your recommendation stalls. Maybe what happens is that your recommendation gets reshaped, so your idea gets totally bent out of shape. Maybe the conversation goes up, off, to the side, up, backwards, in a whole different direction. Now, this isn't because the idea was weak. This is because influence isn't built on how well you explain your idea or your thinking. It's built on how well your thinking and your idea lands with the people who need to back it, who need to act on it, and who need to move it forward. So it's not, if that's not consistent for you, if that's not what's happening, it's not about your capability, it's about your influence. Now, strong thinking is always going to get attention, and well-landed recommendations will create action. That's how it is out there. I'm Beth Bergen. I'm a global leadership and communication coach. Join me. This is ideal for you if your ideas are solid, but your recommendations are not converting or aren't yet converting. We're going to start by looking at what actually happens and what actually might make those ideas and recommendations land. So the first one, the first talking point, just adjusting myself today, my apologies. Firstly, the recommendation must be relevant, not just logical. Now, this is the same as saying, know your audience. Know your audience. That's how important it is, because people prioritize what affects them from a risk perspective, what talks to their priorities, what's going to meet their outcomes. And you can be clear about what you are recommending or saying, but if you don't tick off those boxes, if you don't connect to that risk, that outcomes, those priorities, then it's likely that it will get ignored. Here, it's much less about logic, and much more about impact. So it doesn't have to be a whole lot of language about working your way through all of the detail, but it does have to connect with those priorities, those outcomes, and those risks. So if you want to influence thinking, it's time for you to shift from what I think to what matters to you. So that's all about knowing your audience, as I said. So your influence will come about because you're translating your thinking into their world. And the better you can do that, the more likely you are to have more opportunities for influence. Because if your recommendations don't solve their issue, they're less likely to move. And if it matters to you, but not to them, it's not going to move ahead. So, as I pointed out, know your audience. Increase your influence by translating your thinking into their world. That's the first point. The second point is this one. Over-explaining weakens your recommendations. So it's kind of like land it quickly or you're going to lose it. You know, a long explanation will signal your uncertainty, not strength. People often make the mistake of thinking, oh, I'll tell them everything I know about this and they'll be really impressed with the amount of work that I've done, and that will help them to feel confident that I've got this. No. Those long explanations signal uncertainty, not strength. And what can happen if you go on and on and on is that you actually dilute your the way that others perceive your confidence is less and less and less. Decision makers, those people that you're going to influence, they're listening for your position on this. They're listening for those things that are going to impact them. The process, all of that, it's going to come later. So don't bamboozle people by talking to them a whole lot about that process, because the more you justify things, the more negotiable it becomes. And if it's negotiable, then people may want to argue with it. That precision, that clarity, that absolutely signals ownership. So that's really important. So know your audience, have that precision and that clarity so that you can own the idea. The third point I want to talk to is this. If you don't frame the recommendation, it gets reframed for you. So if you don't frame it, if you don't make sure that you've got a narrative around your recommendation, if you don't define the problem and the direction, then others will do it for you. And it may be the very person that you're looking to influence. What will happen is that they'll reinterpret it, and they'll reinterpret it from their perspective, not from your perspective. Or not, I shouldn't say that, not necessarily from your perspective. So what's important is that you frame it and then you own it. So make sure that you are defining the problem and the direction so that others can't take that ownership away from you. Now, it can be really useful to frame it and define that problem before you offer your recommendation. But again, clarity. Not about spending ages and ages and ages defining the problem. Identify the aspects of the problem that talk most to the very important needs and priorities of whoever is sitting in front of you, whoever it is that you want to actually influence. Yeah. The fourth point today is this one. Timing and positioning determine whether your recommendation is heard. Now, this is always a really interesting one. The same recommendation, the same idea can land really differently depending on when and how it's introduced. So this is about you being ready to go and not necessarily ready to be asked to speak. So if you speak too early, you can ruin the impact. If you speak too late, you can reduce the impact. And if you don't provide that context in terms of defining the problem, then that can reduce the impact. So what's important here is that you read the room, because when you say what you're planning to say matters just as much as what you're going to say. Now, it takes a bit for people to get this. It's not like think about when is the right time. Now, people often say to me, oh, yeah, but it's an agenda item, Beth. It might be that it is an agenda item. However, if a whole lot of discussion about the issue comes up related to something else, then that might be the ideal time. At the very least, it might be the time to say, I've got some recommendations around this that we'll be discussing as the fourth agenda point. Will we shift that around, or will we leave it until then? Yeah, speaking up, so reading the room. So when you introduce your recommendation, matters just as much as what it is. And it's not just the logical thing. It's not just, as I said, it's not just that, oh, well, it's in the agenda for here, so I'll just be quiet until that opportunity comes along. It's really important that you don't wait to be asked to speak about it, particularly if you've got a great recommendation that you want to be making. Yeah. So we've had some important things here. Know your audience, frame it, read the room. All of these are really important aspects for you to take on board if what you want to do is influence. Now, we're talking here a lot more about how to influence when potentially you're not the decision maker. I probably should have said that at the beginning of today's conversation rather than partway in like this. But that's the critical thing, is, hey, you're not necessarily the decision maker. Perhaps you don't have the title. But you know, the really interesting thing is, this is also vitally important for those people who are in leadership positions, who do have a title, who are wanting to influence their peers or a board or something like that. Yeah. Number 5, if it's not easy to act on, it won't get approval. If it's not easy to act on, what happens is people think, oh, this is too hard. You know, if it's too much effort, they'll just delay it, maybe without even being open and transparent about it. They might just delay it. If it's unclear, if it's risky, if your idea is incomplete, then that's just going to lead to some hesitation. If the next steps that you've provided are vague, oh well, we'll just delay it. And maybe others haven't told you that they're vague. Maybe they don't know. If they don't know that they're vague, or they haven't told you rather that they're vague, then you don't know that. You're just wondering, what's the delay here? So make sure that what you're doing in order to get your idea or your recommendation approved, make sure that your aim is to reduce any friction around that decision. How do we do that? We do that with clarity. So here's my idea. This is what we're doing. It's concise. This is the process. This is what we're doing. and it's stepped out so that people know this is what needs to be done next. And when you're in a meeting, once you've got that approval, you're able to be really clear that this is what needs to happen next. Yeah, this is the thing that needs to happen next. And that way, more likely to move. Yep. Let's now share one practical leadership intelligence tool for you. Now, I call this my land it framework. And this is a structure for you to look at before you're actually going to speak. And the first thing is this. It comes in 3 parts. Now, as I've said before, it'll feel a bit clunky to start with. Use your language. What I'm doing is providing you with a framework. That's why it's called a framework, right? But the language that I'm putting here is sufficient to help you get started. And often with these kinds of conversations, the most difficult thing is, how do I get started? Okay, so the first part is, what's the move, right? What's the move? What is it that you want to do? And you need to provide a clear recommendation here. I'll give you an example shortly of what this whole 3-part looks like when it all comes together. So that's the first one. What's the move? The second part is why it matters to them. Not you, no, them. Why it matters to them. And this is that risk, the outcomes, and the priorities that I talked about earlier. The third one is what happens next. So this is that next action that we were just referring to. And it's that, who's got the ownership. So an example would be like this. My recommendation is we move forward with X. This reduces risk in Y and improves Z. The next step would be, and give them a clear action. Yeah? Let me run through that example again. My recommendation is we move forward with X. Now, just a tip. X isn't 3 sentences. X is short, concise, with clarity. That's what we're doing. So my recommendation is we move forward with X. This reduces, or whatever you want to say, like why it matters to them. So I'm using risk. This reduces risk in Y and improves. So we've ticked off on 2 outcomes, 2 reasons that we should be doing it. And then we've clearly offered the next step. The next step would be clear action. Now, the hardest part. After you've said that 3-part statement, you stop. You don't talk. You celebrate the silence. You sit there. And that's the hardest bit. Because as human beings, we want to fill that space. We forget how powerful a pause actually is. We forget what we're doing when we stop is we're letting those who are listening process, and they'll ask questions for clarity if they need to, for greater clarity, for greater understanding, for anything they feel uncertain about. Yeah? Think about that 3-part statement and the difference that it would make. Now, the critical thing is that you have with you anything that you might need to refer to be able to answer questions that people are going to ask. So if you're going to get a question that digs down into the detail that sits around your idea or your recommendation. What's really important is that you've got that there and that you can refer to it. Like, I think a mistake that often we make is we think we have to know all this stuff off by heart. Prepare yourself a bit of a cheat sheet that you can refer to say, okay, here, this is the situation. It's perfectly okay for you to do that. Like, lots of people go, oh, my ego gets in the way. I don't want to be doing that. It's perfectly okay. What's more important is that you've planted it there, you've planted the seed, and then you've stopped and let them ask you questions. Okay, let's have a look at your reflection question for this week. The reflection question is this one. Where am I explaining my thinking instead of making my recommendation easy to back and act on? Where am I explaining my thinking instead of making my recommendation easy to back and act on? Maybe you're nervous. Maybe you're unsure of exactly what the task is or what the recommendation is. Maybe you haven't been able to make up your mind and you've got a number of different recommendations. Maybe you're not ready to actually talk about it. So, as I've said before, with all of these reflection questions, ask the question, go away, come back, write some more down. Go away, come back, and what else? And what else? Yeah, put some actual examples there for you. So, takeaways from today. Strong, well-delivered recommendations are more likely to get you an outcome. Know your audience. It's not the loudest voice that has the most influence. Not the loudest voice at all. It's the one that has relevance. It's the one that has clarity. It's the one that has timing. So think about building those kinds of skills and that level of awareness. What needs to happen here is that your communication needs to shift so that you can get some success. I was talking to a bunch of people this morning and talking to them about how important it is for us to be willing to learn. But what's wrapped up in that and what doesn't get talked about nearly as much is that we have to be, we have to be really willing to unlearn. So we've got to unlearn some habits and patterns that we already have so that we can replace them with new ones. So, if your ideas and recommendations keep getting acknowledged but not acted upon, that's not about your effort, that's about influence. And leadership actually isn't measured by how well you think. It's measured by what moves, by what changes because of your thinking. And if you're ready to shift that to make your ideas and your recommendations convert, use the QR code or use the link in the platform that you're watching this on and book a conversation with me. I'd love to have that conversation with you because, the people who shape decisions are the ones whose thinking actually gets acted on. And if your recommendations aren't being acted on, they're not influencing yet. That doesn't mean that they can't. It simply means that you are not influencing the decision makers yet. Okay, a reminder. Leadershipisation, all things leadership, is being converted into a podcast. All of the back stories, all of the back conversations that I have are being converted into a catalogue of podcasts that is launching this Thursday, the 21st of May. Now, it's not replacing. It's not replacing these conversations. I love these conversations. They're fresh, they're timely, and they're relevant to what's going on right now for leaders. It's another access for you. It's about you being able to go back and find them and access backstories into the 6 dimensions of leadership intelligence that I've developed. So it's a great way for you to be able to access and go back and find things that are relevant to where you might be right now in your leadership journey. So it's going to be available on YouTube and Spotify and Apple and other platforms. And what I'll make sure to do after next week's live leadershipization is share the link with you. In the meantime, you want to have a conversation with me, you've got the QR code or you've got the link in the platform that you're watching this on. Thanks. Questions and comments here, and we'll get back to you. See you next week. Bye now.